The entertainment industry is one of the most powerful influences of communication in the world. From television and film to music and gaming, the industry generates billions of dollars across the world. We are all familiar with those in front of the camera or those we see in paparazzi magazines. But we never often hear as much about those persons that are the game pushers or game changers, who create the entertainment we watch and hear. The relationships and pressures that are on the executives to fulfill our cravings for entertainment experience the constant demands to execute and satisfy. Sometimes the decisions they have to make and the influencers around them challenge their faith and position them to take stands that they are not always comfortable with. I recently had an opportunity to sit and speak with one of the biggest influencers in the music industry, Shanti. For over 20 years, Ms. Das has promoted the careers of the world's biggest artists, including Stevie Wonder, Prince, Outkast, and TLC, to name a few. Her journey led her to some high, very successful places, but it also took her to some very dark, depressed places, which culminated in her trying to take her own life, largely because of toxic relationships and her inability to set relationship boundaries. Let's take a look. Shanti, thank you for allowing us in your lovely home. It's a joy and a tremendous honor for me to just sit down and to really talk about your story.
Thank you.
What
it's
an
honor
amazing,
for me as well.
Well, it's really, I think it's probably more my honor, but either way, it's a joy. But you've had an amazing story. I mean, your impact in the entertainment world, particularly in the music space, is phenomenal. Some of the biggest names in music you were responsible for. And it's amazing to see how God has used you to really be, in many ways, a world changer in the music space. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
I started interning at V103, which was a local radio station here in Atlanta that actually is still going strong now. I attended Syracuse University and ended up my second year getting into the SI Newhouse School of Communications, which is one of the top schools for communications in the country. And so once I knew that I really wanted to do this music thing, I tried to get involved in as many activities on campus as possible. And then in the summers, I started doing internships. So I landed and paid internship at Capitol Records the summer of my sophomore year. And I'm not afraid to tell my age. It was 1991. And things worked well for me. And so I went back there after my junior year. And then upon graduation, I interned at Sony Music here in Atlanta. And it's funny, in your book, you talk about relationships. And so I always tell students when I'm talking to them that we live and work in a relationship economy, and it's all about a lot about who you know.
Everything revolves around
relationships. You need to have those skills and know your craft, but it is so much about who you know and establishing great relationships. And so the gentleman that actually hired me at Capitol Records started consulting for LA Reid and Babyface because they had just set up shop here in Atlanta. And lo and behold, 4 months later, here I am getting hired as promotions director for LaFace Records. And I literally hit the ground running. My first tour was Toni Braxton, opening up for Frankie Beverly and Maze. And I was responsible for making sure that the radio programmers and the contest winners got to meet her after the show and setting up meet and greets and making sure she had whatever she needed. So being able to work for someone like L.A. Reid and Babyface, was an honor in itself. It has been absolutely fantastic, but it has not been easy. It has not been easy.
Talk about that. I mean, you have just had an amazing life, a life that I think many people would ascribe to and say that's the picture of success.
It's funny because I thought that success was just based on, your title, or your salary, or what type of car you drove, or the neighborhood you lived in, what your itinerary looked like for your vacation, and all the trinkets. I do love nice things. I'm a lady that loves handbags and shoes, but I do think I was a little misguided in that, and just working around celebrities 24/7. There were moments where I got caught up and felt like I had to have, an expensive dress for the red carpet and the. So
those relationships began to impact your life in
they
various
did
ways.
And it's funny, you know, when you realize like what those relationships really were, and I don't think some of them were real relationships, you know, it was a part of the job, you know. And I think you and I talked about this earlier, using the word friend or taking it too loosely or not, or even just understanding the type. They were just business relationships. And I think sometimes I thought they were more personal relationships. And so I felt like, you know, I could do everything sometimes that the artist was doing, or that I should be just as fly, if you will, in terms of my appearance, and that I needed to look a certain way, you know, if I was going to be attending some of these events with my artists. And, you know, it took me later on in life to realize, like, you know, that's not what it's about. I was hired to do a service and to make sure they were okay. And so I think sometimes I misunderstood what those relationships were. And it took me kind of walking away from the business to really understand some of the mistakes I made.
How did the notion of toxic relationships play into your journey?
Wow. Particularly on the executive side, I had to deal with a lot of toxic relationships in the workplace. And being a woman, it made it even tougher for me. I don't know why women, we get, I don't know, jealous of one another, or there's this unwritten rule of competition between us. But there were times, you know, within my company, you know, I had to deal with other women that either tried to get me fired or didn't want to work with me. And I just had to really pray about it and find strength and ask God to help me, you know, understand how to deal with these toxic relationships. Because if I wanted to stay in that job and work in that position, it wasn't like I could just rid myself of all these, you know, bad relationships in my life. But I had to work around them and work through them. And I think when I moved to New York City in 2000, particularly once I started dealing with a lot of those toxic relationships, I didn't know how to deal with it or take it. Because, you know, working in Atlanta, when I was at LaFace, and I think a lot of people will tell you this if you know anyone that worked at that company, it was like a family. It was very close-knit, and we were very much team players. It wasn't about stepping on anyone's toes. All of our departments worked together. But once I moved to New York City, it was a more corporate environment. You know, everyone was kind of scrambling to keep their position and their job security and that sort of thing. And so it was just a toxic environment. You know, people would smile in your face and talk about you behind your back. It was difficult, you know, dealing with those toxic relationships. And as determined as I was, and I was, you know, definitely determined to win. I don't know, sometimes I wonder where I get that drive from. And maybe it's because, you know, my mom was a single parent. And I'm not embarrassed to say that my father committed suicide, you know, when I was 7 months old. And I think I just wanted to win, you know, that much more to be able to do for my family. And, you know, my sister, who's older than me, endured so much. And just watching her and seeing the type of, you know, strength that she would exude, you know, in all of her situations. But definitely, I think by working in the entertainment business, you definitely need to have faith and to have that relationship with God, because you're faced with a lot of temptations in that business.
I was going to say that. It's amazing to hear your story of just the tremendous success, but then the inner craving to really have a personal relationship with the Lord. Because I think the world has seen countless stories of how life in the music business has an underbelly to it. It's not just all glitz and glamour.
Absolutely not.
That oftentimes that lifestyle comes with
or what
heavy
will you
consequences.
do to attain that lifestyle?
Or exactly,
especially as a woman.
How manipulative will that desire, you know, wanting it, how it shapes your life and often will manipulate you to do some of the things that a lot of people thought they never would do. I'm sure you saw a lot of that.
I did.
And so it sounds like your relationship with God was the compass.
I think so, because there were times where I felt like there were advances made towards me sexually from some of my male counterparts, particularly a few of my bosses in the past. And it was my relationship with God that got me through it.
So was every day easy? And what I mean by that is, I mean, you accomplished amazing success. You have now a thriving relationship with the Lord. It seems like you have the recipe then for a perfect life.
No, not at all. And we can go back a couple of years, even before, if that's okay. Some of those toxic relationships were starting to affect the workplace. I had a new boss at the time, and I hadn't worked with him before, and he was a bit of a yeller. And
just a bit of a yeller.
Yes, would use profanity in the workplace and that sort of thing. And I just wasn't used to that.
Yeah.
And it's not to say I don't have thick skin and can't handle a lot of stuff, but it was just a very different experience for me, and definitely a toxic environment. And so I was fed up. And I remember having some really dark thoughts. I mentioned earlier that my dad had committed suicide. And for the first time in my life, I had contemplated taking some pills. And I didn't know what to do. It just wasn't working out for me. I wasn't eating. I was breaking out. I didn't have that relationship with God, that I needed. I didn't know where to look and turn to for somebody to help me out of that situation. Now, thankfully, I didn't end up taking anything. But I even talk about this in my book where, it was that dark night for me. And I talked to my sister, and a good friend of mine at the time kind of talked me off the ledge. And so that's when I knew, okay, you got to lean on somebody other than yourself to get you through this. And I knew that it wouldn't get any easier. Certainly having those high positions is not a bed of roses, all the politics and things that you'd have to deal with from a day-to-day standpoint. It's a lot on anybody. And it definitely, all that glitter ain't gold, And so I think
with all of the success, you realized that there had to be something greater and something more to your life.
Absolutely.
Order your copy of The People Factor by visiting us online at vanmoody.com or by calling us at 888-500-1997. That's 1-888-500-1997. Get your relationships in order today. Don't wait. Your journey to being a better spouse, friend, boss, parent, and person starts now. The People Factor, the best-selling book by Van Moody, will change your life.
What Ms. Dawes has just described with variety and vivid details are the devastating effects toxic relationships can have on you. A toxic relationship literally douses your joy, drains your energy, steals your time, distracts you from God's purpose for your life, and can even dampen your dreams and can rob you of your vitality and zeal for life itself. Toxic relationships suffocate your life, and if you allow them to, they can be as dangerous and devastating to your well-being as drinking a sip of poison every day. Now, all of us, if we are not careful, can find ourselves in toxic relationships. This is why it's absolutely critical that you know the signs. Just as evident as the sun shining on a beautiful day, betrayal leaves clues, and toxic relationships have indicators. One of those indicators is that a toxic relationship is often based on a shared past or a shared pain, but not a shared future. Often in life, we connect with people because we've been through things in our past with them, or because they were with us at a critical point in our past. But just because that was the case does not mean that these are the same people that are destined to walk with us in our future. Another indicator of a toxic relationship is when one person benefits from the relationship without being grateful or appreciative. Healthy relationships exist because of mutuality, meaning that within them they have the aspect of give and take. When one individual in the relationship is not appreciative or grateful, they position themselves in that relationship as a taker. And if you're in a relationship with a person that constantly takes and never gives, after a while you'll find that you internally are empty. That relationship is not healthy long term. Another indicator of a toxic relationship is when one person is pursuing God's purpose and promises while the other person is headed in a different direction. The people that you are going to be in a relationship with have to agree to the values and principles and goals that you have determined will direct your life. If not, they will subtly derail you from your destiny and from God's very best for your life. Now, one of the best ways to effectively deal with toxic people is to establish healthy boundaries. When you set boundaries in your relationships, you set limits that will keep you healthy and will keep other people from taking too much of your time, energy, or resources. Boundaries help people understand how far they can go with you and communicate what you will and will not allow.
I started developing some health issues. I had what's called cervical spinal stenosis, where the fluid wasn't properly getting into the vertebrae in my neck. And so they thought I needed to have surgery on my spine, and still dealing with some of the toxic relationships that were at the company. And so I just felt like all of this was coming down on me at one time. And I was like, okay, God, like, I get it. My time here is up. You know,
you feel like God was trying to talk to you.
I really did. I felt like he was trying to tell me, baby, it's time to go home. For a number of reasons. Yourself, your mom, your uncle, just your soul, if that makes sense. I felt like I was still losing a little bit of myself. I missed those relationships that I had established in high school, you know, my real friends, the healthy relationships. Absolutely. I longed for that. I needed that. And I took a huge leap of faith and decided to walk away from my job. You know, and of course, all of those factors, you know, helped in the decision making.
The big job. I mean, New York, corner
office, 6-figure plus salary.
Wow. Some people can't even wrap their mind around 6-figure plus.
People thought I was crazy. Like, what do you mean you're quitting and you're going home? Like, what do you mean you're walking away? And, you know, my boss was very, very supportive, because that was at the time where I thought I needed surgery. And so even when I decided not to have the surgery, I was still suffering, you know, from the side effects of the illness. And, you know, my arms would go numb and my legs. And so, you know, I felt like God had allowed me to be healthy for all these years and do all of this. Like, why now? You know, what was going on? And so I just had to listen to him. And I also felt like all these years he was grooming me to just be of service to others and to really want to give back. So it's interesting, you know, kind of looking back at some of those toxic relationships that I had to experience when I was in New York City. You know, I've run into some of those people in recent years, and, you know, through keeping in touch on Facebook and that sort of thing. And I try to, you know, post a lot of the positive things that I'm doing in the community. And so, you know, some of those folks have just been so gracious and kind to me, you know, seeing a lot of the civic work that I'm doing. And I'm not doing any of it for, you know, a hand clap or a pat on the back. But it's interesting to see how now that I'm doing more of God's work, that some of those people are actually a little kinder to me now. So
yeah, you're a city set on a hill. You're a light that's shining in darkness. And those are things that can't be ignored. The courage, though, it strikes me that people that are watching who also maybe are connected to toxic relationships or maybe at a crossroads in their own life, it strikes me that they also need to appreciate the courage that it takes to step away from something particularly as lucrative and as glamorous as your former life.
Sure.
To really follow what God is saying for them. Talk about that. I don't know if you can even quantify, but I want you to try.
One word for you.
Yeah.
Humility.
Wow.
God has humbled me and dwindled down all of that, you know, pomp and circumstance and everything, you know, that you hear and read about in the industry of what we think our life is. And it's, you know, this grandiose lifestyle and that sort of thing. And, you know, I'm an entrepreneur now. You know, I work for myself. It has been a very difficult transition when you make those sort of comparisons or those life comparisons. But it is a greater reward, I think, than I've ever had in my life. And my relationship with God is magnified so much more now. And, you know, when I post now, you know, I even joke about it because I feel like God has a sense of humor. So I call him JC. So like JC and I are like thick as thieves, you know, and I talk to JC on a constant basis. I reference him in my social media posts, in the work that I'm doing and everything that I'm doing. And, you know, even I still have tough days. You know, I still suffer from depression sometimes. Very difficult from making a lot of money to now having the, you know, one 3 months might be great, and then the next 3 months might be really difficult, and you have to make tough choices. Or like now, when I go to award shows, there's no limo, there's no red carpet. I still may be able to get that ticket and attend, but I'm going, just like everybody else. But again, it's God has shown me where to place my value. I have a different value system in life now, and so I don't place my value on things anymore. I place my value on my relationship with Him, how I'm treating others, What am I doing in the community? What am I doing to really go after my goals and dreams? Because now, my dream, which I think is shared by you, is to become a global thought leader. And I'm really just trying to impress, the youth, on a global standpoint. That's why I do so many panels. And, I'm about to launch my college tour, the college chat room, where I'm going back and inspiring. I have mentees all across the country at various colleges. And that's what I know that God wants me to do now. And so I think, and I can say through my faith in Him, I know He'll continue to bless me in other ways, and some of that stuff will come back to me tenfold, but that's not why I'm doing it. And He's allowed me to become so successful so that I can share that with everyone else. I get that now. It's not about me. And we all oftentimes think it's about us.
Yeah,
it really isn't.
I think that's the power of your journey, that God allowed your life to be elevated to the heights of which it's really even hard for people to fathom. But He took you through all of that to really help you understand, number one, that the relationship with Him is the most important.
Absolutely.
And that when we are pliable and when we allow God to really do what He wants to do in and through us, there's greater purpose, there's more fulfillment. And then on the backside of all of that, there are greater blessings.
And I think He wants us, it's important for us to share our testimony.
Very much so.
Which is why, oftentimes, Pastor Warnock, who's our pastor at Ebenezer, he laughs because he'll say, I know, he knows that I'm tweeting and texting in church, and he's happy about that because I'm sharing the word and sharing the message, because I also feel like I'm not supposed to, hoard all this great information. And even when I'm going through tough times, like God wants me to talk about it, because who knows who I can inspire. Someone else may be going through transition or is an entrepreneur and ready to throw the towel in, but it might be their real plan and purpose that God has for them. And, we just have to endure, and we have to turn to Him. I still have tough days where, even today, before this interview, there were some things that I was looking forward to. A couple of deals didn't close, and it sent me in this weird funk, if you will. And I was like, God, how am I going to do this interview with Pastor Moody? And here I am, kind of questioning my walk a couple hours before this. But He teaches us to persevere and to turn to Him, and that He will keep us on track.
Shanti, your story is amazing, and we haven't even scratched the surface. But with all of the success, with all of the world travels, with all of the major influencers that you supported and promoted, particularly in the music industry, would you agree that this developing relationship with the Lord was really what saved those toxic relationships from derailing your life?
Absolutely. It was my relationship with the Lord, because I think I would have lost myself. I allowed my faith, to work me through those situations, as opposed to just, if there were times where I wanted to be, argumentative and that sort of thing, I always kind of tried to stop and just pray about it before I dealt with the situation, so that I didn't let, my tongue speak negatively, or that I didn't, fall victim or lower myself, if you will, to their standards. And it was all because of Him. I couldn't have done it on my own.
Miss Dawes experienced disconnect because of toxic relationships. Now, the connection for you is this. Don't be afraid or reluctant to leave a relationship if it becomes unhealthy. Don't let feelings of misplaced guilt or sympathy keep you from making a good choice for yourself. I promise that God has better relationships and opportunities waiting for you. Hey, let's continue the conversation. Meet me online at vanmoody.com or via social media on Twitter at van_Moody. And I look to see you next week on Connect.
When I read the book, The People Factor by best-selling author Van Moody, I thought it really was one of those things I wish I had had in my life many years ago. It's one of the best tools you really need to help, develop and build great relationships. it really showed me so many great insights on understanding how they affect you not only in your everyday life, but work and business and so many things you deal with. And it just really opened my eyes to things that I was like, wow.
Ready to take your relationships to new heights? Tired of feeling the same way day after day with little change? You need the People Factor. In this best-selling book by author Van Moody, you'll discover why your relationships are the sources of your greatest joy and the venues of your greatest pain. Learn how to evaluate your relationships properly, identify mutually beneficial relationships, and how to skillfully avoid and exit relationships that are hurtful and damaging to you. Order your copy of The People Factor by visiting us online at vanmoody.com or by calling us at 888-500-1997. That's 1-888-500-1997. Get your relationships in order today. Don't wait. Your journey to being a better spouse, friend, boss, parent, and person starts now. The People Factor, the best-selling book by Van Moody, will change your life. Visit online, call us, and follow us on Twitter.
There is no greater generosity than investing in the gospel. Now, with God's favor and your faithful support, Van Moody Ministries has had an incredible impact by giving people hope, ministering to families, restoring communities, and being a powerful factor, a factor for change for the good in our world. Together, we will equip families and leaders, empower the next generation, and help those who can't help themselves. We are extending our reach across the country, and we want to partner with you. And by God's grace, we will expand the borders of His church and reach one life at a time. I want you to consider being a partner with us today. All of the information is on your screen, and together we can be a factor and make a difference. Next week on Connect, you were living
the dream.
Living the dream.
Living the dream.
Dream wife, dream family,
dream home,
dream business, dream car. So you were on top of the world.
On top of the world. I mean, everything was, I couldn't have planned it, like I said, better. And then something kind of happened.